Right now, a dark cloud is hanging directly over Papoose. Yes, the longtime partner of the iconic Remy Ma. Step closer, because this entire spectacle transforms into a total maze the second you actually pay attention. When you pull back the curtain to look at the cold, hard data, an unsettling truth emerges. The math is aggressively warring with the fiction being fed to the public. What drove Papoose to stealth drop that cryptic record exposing sudden disloyalty? When the world views this entire saga as a massive, hypocritical web, the culture has judged. The data has landed. And at a certain point, a human being has to look in the mirror and ask, what game are we actually playing? It looks increasingly undeniable that Papoose was desperately leveraging the global fame and massive internet empire of Claressa Shields to generate artificial traction. Yet, here is the fatal blind spot in that desperate strategy. The internet's gaze isn't born from genuine respect. It is fueled by pure, unadulterated chaos. The grim reality is that this wildfire conversation lives entirely on scandal and sensationalism. Nobody is clicking on this to witness artistic growth. They are hunting for the wreckage of infidelity rumors and a shattered public marriage. That is the haunting realization that just isn't breaking through to him. Let's strip away the delusion. If the massive cultural power some claim was actually tangible, shouldn't we be witnessing massive corporate sponsorships, relentless global tours, and endless commercial deals? Instead, analysts are pointing out the sobering fact that Claressa Shields quietly retreated to the Zeus network, sitting as a reality TV judge for the Baddies Audition Tour, a move that only deepens the mystery. Simultaneously, Papoose continues to frantically unload audio files, verses, and projects into the void, one after the next. Yet, an eerie detail caught the eye of the community. Claressa Shields didn't utter a single word to amplify this sudden, backdoor musical drop. This calculated silence has left the fanbase paralyzed by one haunting question. Was this specific lyrical weapon secretly weaponized against her, too? No outsider holds the definitive truth, but the chilling timing of this rollout makes the unfolding disaster utterly gripping to watch. The most jarring twist in this saga is that Papoose possessed the raw audacity to deliver a record of this magnitude, even as industry insiders point out that there is zero actual energy backing his play. For the digital spectators fueling the fire in his comment section, you could argue they are simply keeping a toxic cycle breathing for entertainment. Let's be completely transparent. The vast majority of voices screaming praises for Papoose on a timeline aren't actually opening their streaming apps to listen to his catalog. In fact, seasoned music critics openly wonder if his average follower could even recite the titles of 5 standalone projects he has released. When you trace his absolute pinnacle moments, they inevitably anchor back to explosive duets alongside Remy Ma or vital cosigns from legendary icons like Busta Rhymes. Strip away those powerful lifelines, and industry veterans argue that his cultural footprint and artistic traction completely evaporate into thin air. Still, the internet continues to fabricate heroic myths online, blissfully ignoring the devastating real-world collateral damage done to sacred families and public unions. Ask yourself a very human question. If this exact betrayal shattered your own household or affected your blood relatives, would you really be standing on the front line fiercely defending this behavior? That is the terrifying hypnosis of parasocial manipulation. Observers become so aggressively attached that they lose all connection to logic. One minute the defense is that she is an undefeated boxing champion, but the next minute the public is whispering uncomfortable questions. Where is her next championship bout? And why has her athletic calendar completely frozen? Then you pivot back to Papoose, a man constantly praised as a master of lyricism. Yet the culture immediately demands an answer to one devastating question. Where is the definitive, culture-shifting hit record? A few creative directors even argue the entire song would have resonated far better with a powerful vocalist anchoring the hook, or an entirely different sonic direction. Regardless, after the digital chaos settled, pure curiosity inevitably gripped the hip-hop community. Without lingering any longer, we forced ourselves to inspect the actual digital pulse of Papoose's latest musical offering. Because if there was truly this much radioactive hype, even a minor, subliminal retaliation aimed at Remy Ma, the data would naturally explode across the charts, right? The viewership would be undeniable. The momentum would be staggering. Well, the receipts are officially in. As eagle-eyed observers instantly flagged, mirroring a pattern seen across so many of Papoose's independent rollouts, This specific effort suffocated upon arrival, garnering a tragic 4,000 streams over a grueling 19-hour window is simply not the triumphant victory lap the world was promised. This exact failure is precisely why it is mandatory to drag Remy Ma's historic performance metrics back into this intense debate. In recent months, an aggressive faction of trolls has attempted to completely erase her monumental legacy, callously dismissing her as an irrelevant relic or claiming her cultural footprint never actually mattered. It is wild to witness how casually people are trying to rewrite absolute hip-hop history when it comes to the legacy of Remy Ma. They will boldly lie and claim they have never bumped her catalog, pretend they are completely oblivious to the golden era of the Terror Squad empire, and treat her classic debut album as if it never shook the streets. But let's stop playing games and look at the facts. Globally, every single person knows exactly who Remy Ma is. It feels deeply structural, like certain critics are intentionally trying to tear down her statue just to validate or protect the messy, chaotic reality currently surrounding Papoose and Clarissa Shields. But the undeniable truth about Remy Ma is simple. The second she unloads a verse, the numbers tell a story that cannot be faked. Surrounding Pap and Clarissa. But one thing about Remy, whenever she drops something, the numbers always tell the truth. There's never a need to manipulate, inflate, or spin the narrative because the results speak for themselves. Now, compare that to what we're seeing with Pap's numbers, because this is where things get interesting. Believe it or not, his disc record aimed at music, 50 Cent actually performed better than this latest release. But again, controversy was the driving force behind those numbers, wasn't it? At that time, everyone was trying to capitalize off the attention surrounding 50. The difference is that PAP never received the type of exposure or star power that artists like T.I. managed to turn into bigger opportunities. We're talking performance invitations, tours, media appearances, and major industry attention. Meanwhile, Papoose seemed to walk away from the table completely empty-handed, save for a transactional bone thrown by DJ Vlad. And even that entire platform exchange only caught fire because DJ Vlad publicly pushed a humiliating narrative, whispering that Papoose was secretly terrified of Clarissa Shields. Let that sink into your mind for a cold minute. You are no longer being invited into media spaces due to your lyrical wizardry or your status as an elite MC. The entire cultural discourse surrounding your existence is tethered entirely to the gravity of 50 Cent, Remy Ma, and Clarissa Shields, completely bypassing your actual art and creative identity. That is a brutal, agonizing truth to swallow. Yet, despite the flashing warning signs, the desperate thirst for relevance rages on. The desperate hunt for clout persists. The exhausting scramble for ears never stops. But the consumer base has delivered its final verdict. And an overwhelming majority now believe that Remy Ma possessed the correct foresight from the very beginning. At a certain milestone, a creator must bow to reality when the open market is screaming an undeniable truth. Because here lies the fundamental crisis. It feels as though Papoose is a ghost trapped in a long-dead era. Cultural analysts openly state he is navigating with a rigid 1990s playbook in a completely revolutionized ecosystem. The terrain has evolved, and the legendary figures of his specific generation aggressively pivoted with the times. They transitioned into corporate tech investments, high-end real estate, prestige acting roles, Hollywood production, and carving out empires that transcend audiophiles. Stepping on a stage is no longer their lifeline. It is merely a vanity project on top of a massive financial castle. Naturally, the culture is beginning to ask the hard questions. What tangible asset is Papoose actually engineering outside of the recording booth? What executive leverage does he truly command over at Win Records? What are the generational power moves? Because watching from the perimeter, the entire playbook seems to consist of blindly firing records into the dark, praying that one rogue bullet miraculously sparks a wildfire. But here is the chilling reality. Insiders argue that this archaic blueprint is completely dead on arrival. The public is feeling zero emotional attachment to the music, and the icy silence greeting these rollouts is impossible to ignore. A few aggressive commentators have gone as far as labeling these songs unlistenable garbage. In fact, a massive wave of listeners is now completely abandoning the legendary, decades-old myth that Papoose was secretly penning the iconic bars for Remy Ma. They point directly to the complete lack of cultural gravity, replay value, and widespread apathy surrounding his solo drops as definitive proof that the math simply doesn't add up. And let's not overlook how the official rollout eventually played out. According to sharp observers, the initial teaser snippet pushed to Instagram was so devastatingly flat that the entire digital community completely checked out before the full audio file even hit streaming platforms. The collective audience essentially muttered, "We are good," and aggressively swiped away. That is the exact disconnect that refuses to click for Papoose. So many of these desperate maneuvers are failing to convert into any form of real-world equity. The digital noise isn't generating revenue. The momentum is permanently stalled. And the burning question echoes louder by the day. When does the delusion stop? At what specific point do you stop aggressively force-feeding a culture music they never requested, never wanted, and have zero intention of ever streaming? Because right now, for anyone analyzing the chessboard, the strategy looks completely chaotic. So today, we are forcing a deep, uncomfortable look at Papoose. Yes, the public counterpart to the legendary Remy Ma. And believe me, this psychological maze only grows more toxic the further you descend into the rabbit hole. Because when you strip away the social media filters and look at the hard analytics, something feels deeply wrong, and the metrics are openly fighting the fiction being broadcasted to the masses. Why did Papoose rush out that desperate, backdoor track just yesterday weeping about betrayal, when the entire culture views this situation as a massive, walking contradiction? The audience has ruled, the spreadsheets have landed, and at a certain point, you have to look at this circus and ask, what are we actually doing here? It feels glaringly obvious that Papoose was entirely banking on Claressa Shields' mainstream visibility and giant digital footprint to manufacture artificial hype for his own career. But here is the fatal miscalculation they are both making. This intense internet gaze isn't rooted in genuine adoration. It is rooted in pure, rubbernecking fascination with a train wreck. The dark truth is that this viral firestorm is fed exclusively by chaos, trauma, and media headlines. Nobody is tuning into this channel for anything beyond the scandalous affair allegations and the toxic breakdown of a public marriage. And that is the exact reality check that seems completely blocked from registering. Because let's be totally transparent. If the astronomical level of fame being claimed was actually authentic, wouldn't we be looking at massive corporate endorsements, a booked-out global calendar, and endless elite opportunities? Instead, industry critics are highlighting the incredibly sobering reality that Claressa Shields ultimately crawled back to the Zeus network, serving as a lower-tier judge for the Baddies audition phase, a career pivot that only triggers a flood of uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, Papoose continues to frantically dump songs, verses, and audio tracks into the digital void, one right after the other. Yet, a fascinating piece of evidence was instantly flagged by the community. Claressa Shields didn't even bother to upload a single post to help amplify or validate this sudden backdoor musical release. This icy silence has left a massive portion of the fanbase wondering out loud. Was this specific lyrical weapon secretly targeting her as well? Aimed at her too? No one holds the master key to this mystery, but you absolutely cannot deny that the eerie timing converts this entire spectacle into something deeply fascinating to watch. Because the most baffling twist in this equation is that Papoose actually summoned the raw confidence to unleash an emotional record of this scale, even while industry insiders point out there is zero authentic visibility or movement backing his career. As for the digital enablers cheering him on in the comment sections, sharp minds would argue they are merely feeding a toxic machine just to keep the public entertainment breathing. Let's strip away the internet delusion. The vast majority of voices screaming praises for Papoose across social media platforms aren't actually opening their streaming apps to listen to his projects. In fact, veteran music journalists openly question whether his internet defenders could even name 5 solo records from his entire catalog. When you look at the absolute peak moments of his career, they flawlessly anchor back to high-stakes duets alongside Remy Ma, or vital validation from rap titans like Busta Rhymes. Remove those critical lifelines from the equation, and culture critics argue that his relevance and commercial gravity completely vanish. Yet, the digital masses continue to spin heroic fairy tales online, entirely blinding themselves to the massive real-world destruction crashing down on sacred relationships and public unions. Look at this through a human lens. If this exact public betrayal shattered your own household or targeted your immediate family, would you genuinely be standing 10 toes down on the front lines defending it? But that is the terrifying psychological hold of parasocial obsession. The internet audience becomes emotionally brainwashed beyond all boundaries of logic. One minute the frantic excuse is that she is an elite, undefeated boxer, but the next second the culture is whispering uncomfortable questions. When was her last championship fight? And why has her athletic schedule completely flatlined? Then the spotlight swings back to Papoose, a man constantly protected as a genius lyricist, yet real hip-hop fans immediately demand an answer to the most obvious question on earth. Where is the undeniable, history-making hit record? A few creative consultants even argue the entire arrangement would have resonated significantly better with a soulful vocalist holding down the chorus, or a completely different artistic blueprint. Regardless, after the exhausting digital circus settled yesterday, pure, unadulterated curiosity inevitably took over the community. So, without dragging this out any further, we forced ourselves to analyze the cold, hard data behind Papoose's fresh musical offering. Because if there was genuinely this much atomic hype exploding online, even a subtle, calculated response aimed at Remy Ma, the streaming metrics would naturally mirror the chaos, right? The viewership would be astronomical. The digital footprint would be terrifying. Well, the receipts have officially cleared. And as eagle-eyed observers immediately flagged, mirroring the exact tragic blueprint of several of Papoose's previous independent rollouts, this creative effort completely suffocated upon impact. Because crawling to a miserable 4,000 views over a grueling 19-hour window is simply not the triumphant cultural moment the internet was anticipating. This exact commercial disaster is precisely why it is legally mandatory to drag Remy Ma's historic statistics directly into this brutal conversation. After all, a loud faction of digital trolls has desperately attempted to completely erase her monumental legacy from the culture entirely.